Well, good morning, guys. Today's Sunday school. It's April 5th, and we're going to be talking about the crucifixion and death of Jesus Christ. Not exactly the happiest topic in the world, but we're coming into Easter, so we're going to continue to move through the book of Mark like we've been doing all year, and that's where we're at for this weekend. Last weekend, I had a question for you guys, and whoever could answer it correctly would win a prize. Well, it turns out it was Abby Palm. Abby, good job. So the question, if you don't remember, I got a few answers, but some of them weren't correct. Actually, Abby's was the first one that was correct, obviously. So the question was, where else in the book of Mark was somebody deeply distressed? Paralipus. That's a tough word to say for me. And some of you weren't quite sure if anybody else had ever bled blood, but actually the word paralipus means to be greatly distressed. And if you remember, if you go back to Mark 6, I think it is, they talk about Herod. Remember? Herod being deeply distressed over the decision to take the head of John the Baptist. And he did it anyway because he wanted to show off and didn't want to look like a fool in front of his guests that were there for dinner. So, Abby Palm, good job. You got the question answered correctly. As a result, we're going to make sure you guys get an appropriate gift. I know you guys like pizza from Holiday, so we'll get you guys either a gift certificate or we'll arrange something with the Holiday station in town here. So, good job. I've got a question for you guys this week, too. Well, let's just go with the question. The question is, during this story that I'm going to read to you, it's mentioned that there's a centurion, and we get a word that's derived from the word centurion, and I want you to tell me, how could I word this? I want you to tell me how many soldiers was a centurion in charge of, okay? That's your challenge question. Whoever gets it right, I'll have a prize for you. So, I'm going to start today by reading the book of Mark. And for those of you that are still following along, 15 minutes a day, I've been getting texts and messages from kids on Remind that they're still reading 15 minutes a day. In fact, some of them are able to do more. So, good job. So we're in Mark 15. We're going to start with 21. And it's a long one, all right? So just bear with me here. And we're going to go all the way through 41, okay? I don't usually like to cover that much ground, but it is Easter. We want to stay on track with the Easter calendar, so I'm going to read it to you, and then I've got some things I want to share with you, and we'll be done for the day, okay? Here we go. A certain man from Cyrene, Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, isn't that strange that they mention his children, was passing by on his way in from the country, and they forced him to carry the cross. They brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. Then they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him, dividing up his clothes. They cast lots to see what each would get. It was the third hour when they crucified him, and the written notice of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." They crucified two robbers with him, one to his right and one to his left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, "So, you are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days? Come down from the cross and save yourself." In the same way, the chief priests and the teachers of the law mocked him among themselves. "He saved others," they said, "but he can't save himself? Let this Christ, the King of Israel, come down now from the cross, that we may see and believe." Those crucified with him also heaped insults on him. Strange, isn't it? At the 6th hour, darkness came over the whole land until the 9th hour. And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of those standing near heard this, they said, "Listen to him. He's calling Elijah." One man ran, filled a sponge with wine and vinegar, put it on a stick, and offered it to Jesus to drink. "Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to take him down," he said. With a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. The curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus heard his cry and saw how he died, he said, "Surely this man was the Son of God." Some women were watching from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the younger, and of Joseph, and Salome. In Galilee, these women had followed him and cared for his needs. Many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem were also there. There's a lot happening in this story. I think I say that every week, don't I? But there's a lot going on in this story. Let's go to the beginning here. Why do you think they mentioned Simon by name? I think that's strange that you would mention him by name when all he was a person from the crowd that they chose to carry the cross. You know, when you were being crucified in this day, there's a lot about crucifixion. We've talked about it in Sunday school and Wednesday night, and the incredible sacrifice that was made by Jesus on our behalf. I don't know if I'll get into great detail on that today, because there's a lot of other things that we can go through here, and I've got like 20 pages of notes here, so I don't think I'll go through them all, but I just, every time I read this, I get more and more out of it. But it says here that he was forced to carry a cross. You know, that was a Roman sort of a tradition. I don't know if I want to put it that way because it's such a macabre event, but it was a tradition that the Romans would have the person who was persecuted, in this case, they would have him carry his own cross. Now, when we think about that, we think of the cross, right? We think of the whole cross being carried, but in reality, it didn't work that way. What happened was, outside of Jerusalem in this case, but let's imagine Aiken, okay? Let's imagine the outskirts of Aiken, let's say on Highway 169, you know, when you're coming northbound on 169, and just before you get to Paulbeck's, there's kind of a little bend in the road, and in fact, there's a sign there that says Aiken. And imagine that being the road into Jerusalem, a heavily traveled road where a lot of passersby would go. That's where the Romans would choose to put their crosses. Now, what they would do, first of all, the entire total cross isn't really carryable. There's no way a person could carry it after the beating that they would take before going on to the cross. The cross could weigh up to 300 pounds. That's a lot of weight, especially after you've been beaten. You've probably been in prison for a couple of days or longer. So what they would do is they would put the upright portion in the ground, and that would stay there all the time. And what the person who was charged with, they would have to carry the cross piece. The horizontal piece would be carried by the person charged in this case. And that could weigh up to 75 pounds, depending on the size of it. Some as light as 30, and there were cases where they feel it could have been as heavy as 100 pounds. So imagine carrying 100 pounds with your arms outstretched, and you're kind of moving through town. You've just been beaten pretty severely on your back and wherever they chose to beat you. So you're in a lot of pain. You know, in the case of Jesus, there was a lot of blood loss. He was beaten just about to the point of death, per a bunch of experts. In fact, when the guard comes out and sees his condition, he gets a bit upset and has them stop. So, yeah, so that's the carrying of the cross there. There's a couple of key words in this first paragraph. I'll read it to you. Actually, I'll go up. I'm going to go up a little bit here. And it's where the soldiers mocked Jesus in the paragraph just prior to the crucifixion. And in verse 20, 15:20, and when they had mocked him, they took off the purple robe and put on his own clothes on him. Listen to this key phrase. I have it highlighted. Then they led him out to crucify him. Okay? They led him out. But when we read 15:22, it says they brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha. There's a difference there, isn't there? One is they're leading him out, and the other they had to bring him. This gives you a bit of insight into Jesus' condition at the time. He was beaten pretty severely because when he leaves initially, they're leading him out, which indicates he's moving under his own power. But by the time they get to Golgotha, they had to bring Jesus to that place, okay? That's where Simon came in. Simon had to carry the cross because Jesus, in his condition, was barely able to walk, let alone carry a cross beam of any weight at all. He couldn't even carry his own weight at that time. So it kind of that is a clue as to the condition or the severity of the beating that Jesus endured on our behalf. It goes on here, and I want to jump to another part here, and they talk about the insults that were hurled at him. Did you notice what they were trying to do here? There was a lot of temptation being thrown at him. You know, when we sin, we're not doing God's will, so we're doing somebody else's will, correct? And listen to some of the insults here. They're challenge him to come down from that cross. Come down from the cross and save yourself, say the passerbys. And let this Christ save himself, said the chief priests and the teachers that mocked him. Isn't that crazy? They're trying to get him down. They don't even realize that they're working on behalf of Satan at that time, because Satan would love nothing more than Jesus to give up at this point and come down from this cross and just give up, just stop this charade as it appears. They're just challenging him to come down from there. I think it's humorous in a way, because obviously Jesus knows the end result. Did you know, going back to the crucifixion, or the actual crucifixion itself, that they wouldn't even do it to Roman citizens, that this was something so heinous that they saved it for non-Roman citizens? There's quotes here from Roman historians. Romans were really good at saving their history. They wrote a lot about it, and that's where we were able to corroborate some of the stories. Actually, a lot of the stories of Jesus' time we're able to corroborate through the Roman historians. But here, it's written by, he's a Roman statesman. His name is Cicero, and he said it's so abominable. The act is so bad, it's impossible to find any words adequate to express how horrible it is. Tacitus, another Roman writer, he was a historian, described crucifixion as a torture fit only for slaves. Now remember, slaves were not very highly prized items in this day. So that kind of gives you an idea. You wouldn't even do it to a Roman. So it was a pretty bad act. You know, the Romans didn't actually invent crucifixion. They perfected it, if there is such a thing as perfecting something so horrible. But they made it as painful and as long-lasting as possible. That was their objective through this. So it wasn't anything you would wish on your worst enemy. And the weird thing is, it just mentioned so flippantly in the New Testament that he was crucified. They don't really get into detail. We have to learn the details through other historical documents, because it was just common knowledge. You know, it would almost, I don't know what it would even be akin to today, how to operate an iPhone. You know, it's just something that they know so commonly that they don't even think to add additional information in there. So I thought that was interesting. They just mentioned the word because it was such a horrible act. Everybody knew about it because it was so horrific. Now, I think we've talked about this before in Sunday or Wednesday nights, that when you're crucified, you don't actually die from the nails. You actually die from suffocation. You suffocate under your own weight. By having your arms outstretched as far as they were on a cross, it's actually very difficult to breathe, and you'll suffocate. It's almost like having a bag over your head, which you're not supposed to do, or a pillow over your head, or... So now, in certain cases, depending on the severity of the beating, you could actually die from blood loss, a heart attack, or some other event associated with the beating itself. But the idea of a crucifixion was for you to suffocate under your own weight. Now, in here, I want to talk to you a little bit about what happens when Jesus dies, okay? There's some really interesting events that occur here. And at the 6th hour, I'm going to read to you 1533, and I don't know how far I'll go here, but I want to read you the death of Jesus. At the 6th hour, darkness came over the whole land until the 9th hour. And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? Did you catch what happened there? When some of those standing near heard this, they thought he was calling out to Elijah. But did you catch that? It went dark. Do you know what the 6th hour is? Does anybody know? That isn't the question for the day. But the 6th hour is noon. It's roughly noon. Did you know that? And it goes dark. Now, some people will try to, they're historians, but they're trying to disprove the Bible. They can be agnostic or even atheist. And they'll try to just kind of play this off as it was just a solar eclipse. But I found something interesting here when I was reading. And I found that actually what makes that impossible, and even this event more remarkable than it already is the fact that when the darkness came over the whole land, this is talked about. The Roman historian talks about this, okay? Listen to this. His name is Phlegon. In the 4th year of the 202nd Olympiad, there was an extraordinary eclipse of the sun. At the 6th hour, the day turned into dark night, and the stars in heaven were seen, and there was an earthquake. Well, isn't that interesting? Because when we read here in the New Testament, that's exactly what they described. In the 6th hour, darkness came over the whole land, and the curtain was torn in two, and there's other parts of the New Testament where they talk about an earthquake. So this corroborates what we're reading in the New Testament. This is a historic document from the Romans. And the Romans are if we remember, they're the enemy of early Christians. And now what makes this remarkable is there could have been a solar eclipse, sure. I mean, we see them all the time, right? But it's impossible to have an eclipse when this occurred, because during the Passover, and I didn't know this is very interesting, it's full moon. Did you know that? And in nature, it is impossible to have a natural eclipse of the sun during a full moon. So this makes this event even more extraordinary. Now, to somebody that doesn't know astronomy very well, myself included, it wouldn't seem that incredible at all. Okay, well, there was some darkness because there was an eclipse. But it's more than that, because you have to look at this in its entire context, right? You have to look at this and see that it's at the time that Jesus says, my God, why have you forsaken me? This is his final moments of life, and it's like the entire heavens have just decided to blacken the earth in this horrible event. Now, don't get me wrong. God the Father let this happen to Jesus. And it's a horrible event, isn't it? As we read here, we learn that, in fact, it's so horrible that a Roman centurion changes his stand on Christianity. And as from what we can read here, he even becomes a Christian by his statement, right? The centurion said, who stood in front of Jesus, heard Jesus' cry out and said, surely this man was the Son of God. And those are capitalized, Son of God. He lived a perfect life. He died a perfect death, if there is such a thing. And the heavens cry out in the death of Jesus by blackening the earth, having an earthquake that rips the temple curtain. Now, this temple curtain is another little event here, and it's rather significant because this curtain separated where the average person could go and where only certain people could go to be closer to God. And in Jesus' death, this curtain is just torn in half, absolutely opening all of heaven to every person who believes. And I think it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And in fact, when I say it that way, it gives me goosebumps a bit. Jesus died a perfect death. God put the wrath and fury of sin upon one man. So much so that Jesus, even though he was human and walked on earth, had never felt distant from God, was constantly praying and talking to his Father in heaven, which we've been challenged to do, and I hope we're still able to do, because Jesus demonstrated it, how important it is to pray and talk to God. And when he was forsaken by God, my God, why have you forsaken me? That was the moment that historians or theologians believe that God absolutely put sin upon Jesus. And as a result of that, God had to turn his eyes, and he couldn't look at him. And that was when Jesus felt forsaken by God. You see, it wasn't dying on the cross that Jesus was dreading in the Garden of Gethsemane. That wasn't the part at all. The part I think Jesus was dreading was this part right here, was absolutely feeling separated from God for the first time in his eternal life because he bore our sin and then dying the perfect death. You know, by Jesus dying, it proved that sin is death. And we'll talk about Jesus next week because his resurrection proves that his sacrifice was sufficient for us to make it to heaven. It's a sombering story, isn't it? The Christ dying in your place. There's some parts of this that I want you guys to read, and I threw my notes down here on the ground like a fool. But I want you to read, and it's kind of a long read, but I know you're trying to get 15 minutes. I want you to read Psalm 22, all right? And I want you to read Isaiah, and let me find it here. I had a note here, now I've lost it. I want you to read Isaiah 53, 3 through 6, okay? I want you to read those. But when you're reading those two stories from the Bible, I want you to read them and understand what they're talking about. What they're talking about is this crucifixion of Jesus. But I want you to note the date that these were written, okay? And you'll see that there's something rather remarkable about when these were written and the time frame that we get to when we are actually where Jesus is being crucified, okay? In the meantime, hang in there. We're going to get through this together. I'm starting to contact you guys one by one and see how you're doing, if there's anything I can do personally. So when I call you or text you, whatever I can do to get a hold of you, let me know. If there's anything at all that Tanya and I can do to help you guys out, that's what we're here for. It's easy being a youth pastor when things are going well. It's times like this where we have to make a difference and we need to be there for you. So I'll be getting a hold of each of you. Hopefully it's over the course of this next week. There's a lot of you, but I'll do my best to get each and every one of you contacted. You will hear from me one way or another. If there's something you need in a more urgent manner, feel free to contact myself or Tanya and we'll get something to you. Whatever your needs are, we'll get it to you as soon as we can. In the meantime, keep reading your Bibles. We love you guys and can't wait till we can all get together again. Bye.